Hello everyone, I am Andrew and this is Discovering the Truth. Now I want to start this video off by saying I apologize for last week. I did not have time to be able to get a video uploaded. I'm trying my best to get time in to do this, but I do work a lot and I do have a very big family with children, so babies come first. And of course, I am doing everything I can to try to grow this channel. So if you want to help out a father of 7 that's trying to, do those things, well, family things, on top of trying to become a content creator of hunting down and discovering the truth of the strange, bizarre, and downright terrifying things all around us, all you have to do is like and subscribe, share it around. I greatly appreciate it. Now, I have a story that was sent to me by a gentleman, and this is probably one of the most bizarre things I have ever heard. And to be honest, I've never heard anything like this before. I have never had a description of something this guy's seen. I've never heard anything like this on YouTube. And I'm not just saying that to get, clickbait or anything, but I'm talking about this is probably one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard. I did ask this gentleman for him to come on and tell this story, but he refused. He said he does not want to his name to be told. He doesn't want to be on YouTube, none of that stuff. So he sent me a detailed story through an email. Some of the things I will not be able to say exactly what he said because YouTube kind of frowns upon certain things. So I'm going to reiterate his story as best as I can. So sit back and relax because this is a very, very strange story. I put this in the very high strangeness, like times 10. This is very bizarre. I thought the fairies was bizarre, but this one definitely takes the cake. Alright, so let's begin. So this gentleman, he said when he was a lot younger, he was, I think he said he was about 12 or 13 years old. He lived in St. Petersburg, Florida. And it's crazy because I didn't live in St. Petersburg, Florida, but I did live in a part of Florida close to there. But anyways, this gentleman said that this happened back in, I think he said the 2000s, early 2000s. But he said that there used to be a pier where him and his buddy and his dad and his buddy's dad liked to go fishing all the time. And this particular place, was basically a very long pier, and he said at the very end of it, there was like a tourist attraction. He said it was like a building that sat dead center in the middle of this pier at the end of it, and it was a very, very busy place. But on both sides of this pier, is a big square, people like to fish off the left side, the right side, and then if you go around back, there was an addition added onto it that was a wooden pier that had a couple steps down onto a wooden pier where people like to fish off of. And he said that his family and his buddy's family used to go fishing out there all the time. But during the summertime, when he wasn't in school, his dad would let him go out there and fish with his best buddy, Keith. And he said that they've been going to this same place fishing all the time. And he said it was probably about a 20-minute walk back to his house. So his dad did not mind him being out there fishing. Now, he did want to say this before I continue on. He said that he did not do any drugs, he did not smoke, he did not drink, he did none of those things. He was actually a very well-behaved kid. He tried his best not to get in trouble, and he just really enjoyed fishing. And he also wanted to say that his dad did know that he was out here into late hours of the night and even early morning out here fishing. So anyways, he said that him and his buddy used to go out here all the time. And they used to get out there in the evening time when the tourists and everything started to die down, and there wasn't as many people out there besides other fishermen. Well, he said on this particular night, he said that they were the only ones out there. And he said the reason he knew that is because the normal fishermen that were out there usually left probably around like 9-10 o'clock at night. And this particular night, they wanted to stay and see, how long they could stay out there fishing. Now, he knows the pier does close down, and you can get told by the police to leave the location. But they just said, screw it, they were going to stay and fish. And he said that they were on, if you're walking down the pier, they were on the right side of the building. And he said there's like an old, like not old, but there's like a concrete bench that you can sit at that's pretty close to the water. And they used to, cast their lines, set their poles down that are just a couple feet away, and sit on this bench. And he said that, they did this all the time. It was their normal routine. And he said they had 2 fishing poles, they had a tackle box that was sitting in between them on the bench, and they had a bucket that was behind them on the ground, and that's where they put their fish in. Well, he said it was just a normal night. He said it was, kind of chilly out there when it gets dark and the wind picks up, and they're just kind of sitting there hanging out and just talking, doing their normal stuff. And he said a couple hours have passed by. He said it's probably about I think he said it was probably about 11 o'clock or so. And they were honestly being a little paranoid because they figured a cop would come down the pier, because they said that does happen quite a bit. But this particular night, there was no police officers that came down the pier to make sure. Nobody was on there. So he said that he was sitting next to his buddy and they were fishing. And he said it was a very calm night. There was wind, but it was just periodically the wind would pick up and die down. Well, he said he was sitting there and they were just kind of, talking a little bit here and there. And he said the wind picked up at one point, but he said something very bizarre happened when the wind picked up. He said through the wind he could hear like a strange laugh. And he said the laugh sounded human, but then it did not. He said it more sounded like it was distorted and robotic-y, but also like metallic-y. He said it kind of sounded like, he couldn't really explain it, but that's what he said. He said it sounded very strange. And the first time he heard it, he just kind of ignored it. But then he said it happened again, and his first reaction is to look over at his buddy, and he did, and he's like, dude, don't be playing with me. And his buddy looked at him like he was crazy. He's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you just made that creepy noise. And he was like, I didn't do anything. And right as his buddy said he didn't do anything, the wind picked up again, and it made the exact same sound again through the wind. And he said it wasn't like it was just happening when the wind blew. It was like traveling with the wind. And I don't know about you guys, but that's pretty creepy to hear some, strange, robotic-y laugh, late night on a pier where there's nobody else there. And he did emphasize on telling me that if anybody came onto that pier, you would know it, because where they were sitting at, you could see the only way in on that pier. So if you were walking or in a car, any of that, they would have seen anyone coming from any direction, because there was only one way in and one way out, unless you're going to be swimming, in the water and somehow climbing up on the pier. And he's like, that's just impossible. So him and his buddy kind of look at each other and were like, okay, that's pretty creepy. But they just kind of shrugged it off and went back to fishing. And he said that him and his buddy were kind of, tough kids, They didn't really let anything scare them, and the fact that they had each other, they felt a lot safer. So a few minutes later, he said it did it again, except this time it was a lot louder and deeper. And it was like you could not deny what they both heard. Now, they both kind of looked at each other and was like, "You're really not pulling my leg, right?" They're thinking each other is doing the sound to scare, one or the other. And him and his buddy both looked at each other and like, "No, I didn't make that sound." So he's like, "Do you think somebody's on the pier with us?" And he's like, "I don't think so. We walked the whole pier before we picked our spot over here. We would have seen somebody." And he's like, "There's no workers out here. There's no cars. There's nobody out there." So he's like, "That's very bizarre." So behind them on this concrete bench, there's like a concrete slab it sits on top of. But some of the concrete is kind of separated and broke apart. So his buddy picks up a big giant piece of this concrete and he's like, "I'm going to chunk this in the back of this pier and see if it startles anybody." And he said he knows it was really random and he didn't think anything about it, but he did. His buddy picked it up and he said where they were sitting, okay, so you have this big giant square structure in the middle. And he says on this side, like here, they're sitting on the right side if you were walking onto the pier. And he says you have to go down a little bit and go around the corner, and there's the back part of the pier, and then there's the left side of the pier. And it is completely pitch dark except for a few lights that are illuminating off of the building, and there's some lights that shine down towards the water. But besides that, it is completely pitch dark out, besides the moonlight. So his buddy picks up this large rock, and he chunks it towards the back of the pier. Now, mind you, I asked him a few times on this. He said where they were sitting, he basically didn't throw it over the building. He walked off to the side and threw this large piece of concrete to see if it would hit and startle somebody. He wasn't trying to hurt nobody. He was just trying to see if somebody was out there trying to scare them, so they wanted to scare them back. And he said when he threw the concrete, they waited, but yet something strange happened. They never heard this large rock hit anywhere on the pier, and nor did they hear it hit the water. And they kind of just sat there and they looked at each other like, "Did you hear it?" And the main guy of the story here is like, "I didn't hear anything." And he's like, "That's pretty strange, right?" And of course they're both agreeing on this of why they didn't hear anything. And he said it was completely silent. And he said that at this moment is where it got far quieter than it was before. He's like, before you could hear the wind, and you could hear cars from the distance. But he's like, now it seemed like everything just shut off. All sound shut off. And he's like, did we just not hear the rock hit? Did it like bump into something and slide? That's why, they were trying to come up with, a reason of why they did not hear this large rock hit anything. And going back and forth, they're like, that's impossible. That's just really weird. And of course, his buddy's like, I want to get out of here. And he's like, well, let's stay a little bit longer and then we'll get out of here, see if we can catch more fish. So they both agreed to disagree, but they both ultimately decided to stay for a little bit longer. So they sat down back at their bench. And like I said, the best way I could say it is their bench is right here. They're sitting on it side by side facing the water. And then there's a little bit of the building and then the back of the pier. And he said they were sitting there and they were talking, and then out of nowhere they hear BAM! And they both jump up, scared out of their ever-living minds. Literally jumped up and were terrified. They didn't know what the sound was at first. They're like, what the heck was that? Typical, anybody would respond like that, just out of nowhere, some loud noise. Especially on a pier that is supposed to be, only you and your buddy out here, and the fact that it's dead quiet. And when they realized what it was is when they were very scared. They said when they, standing there after it happened, and they kind of look at each other and they're very scared and shook up, there's water pouring in between their feet where they jumped up in front of their bench they were sitting on. And the water was coming from their bucket, the bucket which held their fish. And when they looked at it, they realized that this same large rock hit the side of their bucket so hard it split it. Now, mind you, he said this bucket wasn't some cheap bucket. This was one of the big paint buckets that his dad had that they cleaned out, and they used it for, a fishing bucket. And he's like, it's very hard plastic. You'd have to really put force behind it to break this thing. But yet this bucket has been split pretty much down one entire side and knocked over by the exact rock that they threw in the back of the pier. Now, when this gentleman told me this, I was honestly freaked out, because I'm thinking to myself, so you threw a rock, you never heard it hit, but then a few minutes later, this same exact rock comes hurling towards you. Could have hit them, but it hit the bucket, splitting it in two. It's like, what if that rock would have hit one of them? Or whatever threw this rock at them wasn't aiming at them. It was aiming to scare them. I don't know. Let me continue. Sorry, I needed a drink. So, they're both completely stunned. They said all the water in their bucket is literally all over the ground. The fish that they caught were flopping around outside of the bucket, and they're just both deers in a headlight looking at this bucket. Completely shocked. They have no idea what just happened. And that's when his buddy spoke up and was like, that's the same rock. That's the same one I threw. And they both looked at the rock, and they kind of did the whole slow head turn towards each other of like, there's got to be somebody out here messing with us. And it upset both of them, because they're like, if that would have hit one of them, it could have potentially, took them out, or, severely injured one of them. He's like, even if that hit you in the leg, anywhere, it would have done bodily harm to one of them, if not both. So they're extremely shook up, but now they're actually, in attack mode, because they're like, somebody tried to hurt us. So this is when things turn for the worst for both of these young men. So Keith looks at him and he's like, are you sure your dad isn't on the pier? Now, mind you, he elaborated for me. He said sometimes his dad would come down to the pier to check on them and would try to scare them. He said that this has happened before, but he didn't think this was the case. And, he looked at his buddy and he's like, no, he's like, if my dad come on the pier, we would have seen him. And he would have never thrown a rock at us like this, because what if he would have missed it and it would have hit one of us? He's like, my dad wouldn't do that, and neither would yours. So they're thinking there's somebody on this pier that was trying to aim to hurt one of them. So they sit there looking at each other, and they're like, well, what do you have? And he's like, I got a pocket knife. And he's like, well, good. And he reached in his pocket, and he had actually a pair of brass knuckles. And they only carried this with them as if they absolutely needed it. And his dad did know that they both had these, little weapons to defend themselves if need be. So the one guy, the main character of the story, pulls out his pocket knife, and the other guy has his brass knuckles, and he's like, you know what we need to do? We need to go scare whoever just did this, or find out who did this and call the law. Because if that rock would have hit one of us, we would probably be severely injured and in big trouble, because we don't, cell phones didn't exist back then. And if they did, of course it was only, more wealthier people that could afford these, cell phones back then. And they're stuck on the middle of a pier away from everyone. So it really upset both of them. So they come up with a plan. And Keith is saying, well, if I go around the front of the pier and go around to the back, and then you go from the side he's on around to the back of the pier, therefore, if somebody runs or tries to hide, we're going to see them. Because he was like, if we both go to the back, the person could go onto the side of the pier and then get off of it. But he's like, but if we split up and I go one way and you go the other, we'll be able to see whoever it was that did this. Right? So they come up with their plan. Keith's going to go around the long way, and we're just going to call him Jake. Jake's going to go to the back to, find out who did this. Now, Jake, which is the main character of the story, said as he was walking, he felt just this awful feeling like he was being watched, and he felt very uneasy. He felt really creeped out, and he's like, I don't know if it was just the rock being thrown and the fact that they were separated. It was late, it was dark, he don't know. But as he's going around the shorter end of the pier to go to the back to see if there was somebody on there, he said that he was walking back towards the back of the pier, and he said there's a couple lights, but they're not like super bright lights, so it was still pretty dark. Now, he did say in the front of the pier there is one bright light that sits out in the front of it, basically where the front door of this little tourist attraction, aquarium type thing that's on this pier. Well, as he's walking towards the back, he's looking around, he don't see nothing, he don't hear anything, and that's when he notices his buddy, and his buddy's just standing there, staring towards the back of the pier. Now, mind you, on the back of this pier, there's like a wooden pier that's been added onto the back of this, fully concrete bridge, and he's just staring, and Jake is walking towards him, and he's like, hey, and his friend's not responding to him at all. He's just staring directly in front, and he's looking, and he's trying to get he's trying to get Keith's attention on like what is going on, and his buddy is not responding to him, and all he does is he's like, look. And that's the only thing his buddy says, and that's when he's seen his hand raise up, and it points toward the back of the pier. And that's when Jake turns and he looks, and he says the best way he could explain this is when you get to the back of the pier, there's of course the railing, but then there's an opening, and it's where the wooden deck is attached onto it. And he's like, it's a couple steps down. I think he said it was like 3 or 4 steps down. It's a little bit lower down. You go down them steps, and then you're onto the wooden dock. But he says if you go directly straight onto this dock, you go down the stairs, you walk a little bit, not too far, but not that small of a space. And then it has 2 arms, one that reaches to the left and one that reaches to the right, where you can go out there and you can fish. And when he realizes what he's looking at, it looks like somebody's standing there. And he says it looks like they're leaning over the railing, onto this wooden dock. And his buddy's like, do you see it? And he's like, yeah, I see it. And just out of nowhere, his buddy is like, hey, you mother blank. You threw that big rock at us. That could have hurt one of us. And he's just cussing and raising Cain with this person that's standing there. And there's no response. There's no nothing. And this is when I tell you I have never heard of anything like this before. He said that as his buddy's doing this thing that was, standing there, as he thought it was a person standing there, but they heard that laughter again, but it was very, very deep and still sounded very robotic-y and metallic-y. And he said they could hear it very, very clear. And he said whatever this person was, or whatever this thing was, let go of the side of the railing. And the way he explained it to me is it looked like somebody with a big jacket on that kind of had their arms like this leaned over onto the dock in front of them. That's what it looked like from behind. And he said the thing let go of the railing and it stood up. He thought this thing was already standing up, but it was not. It was leaned against this railing, like, I guess at a strange angle to where it looked like the person was standing there, but it was only half of it. The other part of it, I guess, was leaned over the railing in front of them. He said this thing rose straight up with its back turned to them, and he realized that it wasn't a jacket they were looking at. It looked like tattered robes. He's like, have you ever heard of like a Buddhist monk? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, like the robes they wear that are like, they have big parts of where their arms are at and a big hood. And I was like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And he's like, well, it was that, except it was all like ripped and torn and tattered. And they couldn't make out a lot, but the lights that were shining onto the water, they could make out that much. And he said when this thing stood up, they were both just kind of in disbelief. They weren't saying nothing to each other. They kind of looked at each other and was looking at it and like... And that's when his friend goes off again. And he's like, if you're going to scare us, I'm going to call the law, blah, blah, blah. And he's just very, very angry and aggressive. And he said, what happens next literally shook him to his core. He said this thing, when it turned, he said that it turned, like from a side profile. He said that when it turned, he said it did have like a snout, like a pronounced snout like a dog when it turned, because he could see it. And he said that when it turned, all he could see was a side profile. He said it did have a big hood on, but the hood wasn't fully on. It was like almost fully on this thing's head. Except I'm thinking, oh God, it's some type of dog man, is what I was thinking. But just listen. And he even stated, he's like, this was not like a canine's head. He's like, it was very narrow but very defined. And he said that he could see one ear or something sticking up. And he said it was like perfectly straight, but it wasn't like it was moving. He couldn't see hair. It was more like metal or something. Some type of, armor. Something of that nature. He didn't know at first. And he said from the side profile, you could see a snout. And it had a solid blue glowing eye. And that's when this thing fully turned around. And he said as soon as this thing turned fully around, he felt his entire body lock up. And when when he tells me this, he really tells me it literally felt like somebody poured his entire body in a concrete mold all the way up to his neck, and he couldn't move. He said that he literally could not move a single muscle on his body at all. He could move his head, but he said even moving his neck and head to look around, it was so hard to that it was draining his energy by just simply trying to turn his head to look at his buddy. And he said this thing was standing in the dark, but somewhat in the light, just staring at them. And he said that both of the eyes were like a bluish white color, and this thing was massive. He said the thing had not a huge head. He said it was a smaller head, but it was dog shaped. And he said it had really big shoulders. It had this strange cloak or something on it. He said the hood covered up one ear, but not the other. It was like this big hood, and you could see like pieces of it that were like tattered and ripped, that were kind of dangling down. And this is when he told me, he's like, I know it sounds crazy, but he's like, I know what I saw. Now, when he turned his head to look at his buddy is literally like shaking. Like his whole body is like convulsing, like he's so scared. And he's just shaking. And he said that he heard this thing speak, but it did not come out of its mouth. He said this thing telepathically was talking to him. And I was like, well, what did it say? And he was like, he's like, there's no need to fear, but there's no need to run. But you might want to. And he said that he heard that exact words out of this thing's telepathically in his head tell him. And he said this is when it gets even more bizarre. He said when this thing started walking towards them, they could not move. They were completely petrified. He said when it walked, it sounded like a suit of armor. He's like, have you ever heard like somebody wearing a suit of armor, you know, in movies and stuff, and they walk and you can hear all the clinking of the metal? And he's like, that's what it sounded like, except they were such heavy steps. And he's like, you could hear the boards underneath this pier like crunching and making a lot of sound from whatever this thing was. Like it was extremely heavy. And he said this thing started walking towards them very slowly, and it was just staring straight at them. And they could not move. He said he tried to move, tried to speak, tried to run, and he couldn't. He said it literally froze them in place to where they could not do anything. And he said this thing started coming towards the stairs. Now he said if this thing made it up the stairs, he said it would probably be maybe 15 feet in front of them, is how close they were. And it got to, he said, the first step, and he heard it lift up its foot, and it did. He said it sounded like metal. But as it was getting ready to walk up that first step, he said on the front of this thing, where its cloak or robes, whatever it was open. Like it was. And he said you could see something that was some type of metal. He said it was like goldish silver color. And the only thing he could think of at the time, and even to this day, he said it looked like it was wearing armor. And he was like very, very beautiful armor. And I was like, what? Like, I was... Sorry, the story is very, very bizarre, but very interesting. And trust me, it gets a whole lot worse. So, just stick with me. Let me take one more drink. I apologize. And if you wonder why I'm looking down, I have his stuff on my cell phone right here, so I'm trying to read parts of it so I can remember the story as best as I can, but also by going by my notes. So, as he's stuck there staring at this thing, and he cannot move at all, he can see his buddy in his peripheral vision that's still just frozen in place there as well. He says as it takes its first step onto the stairs coming towards them, you could hear the metal sound. And this pier that it was, taking these steps on, going up these stairs, he's like, you could hear, not like the wood buckling like it's going to break, but you could hear that it had a lot of weight, whatever this thing was. And he said at the moment it took its full step onto the step, his buddy just took off like a bat out of hell. He said his buddy just tore off, running, hollering, just gone. And he says right when this happened, this thing snapped its head so fast in his direction, but it's like it didn't care. It snapped its head right back to him and started coming towards him still. And now he said he's extremely scared. He doesn't know what's going on, why he can't move, but now his buddy just abandoned him and left him. And he said it went to take a second step up the next step, going up onto the main part of this pier, and that's when he said he felt it. He could feel his legs, and he took off. Now this is when things get very, very creepy. He said when he took off, he heard this very strange sound behind him, and all he could hear was dung 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 of this thing coming up behind him so fast. He said this thing had to have been running at least 20 plus miles an hour within milliseconds. And right as he glimpsed behind him, he said all he could see was this large creature, whatever it was, and he said he seen a hand reach out for him. And he said this hand was human-like, except it was dark, but he couldn't tell if it was fur or just had dark skin, and it had claws on all the fingers that he could see when he turned and he looked. And then right as he's running, he turns and he looks at it, and then all of a sudden he turns back and there's super bright light in his face. And he's getting grabbed as he's running, and he realizes it's a policeman. And the cop is like, what are you doing out here? Where are you running to? And man, he's just stunned. He's like, well, what? And he's looking around all over the place, and the policeman is like, what are you doing out here? What are you running from? All this other stuff. And all of a sudden, the policeman's radio goes off, and he's like, yeah, I got another one back here. And he's like, Jake is like, oh, first thing he thinks is they got my buddy. My buddy's okay. So anyways, the policeman walks him up towards the front of the pier, where another policeman is at with his buddy, and of course there's 2 cop cars over there. And the one policeman, they both are over there talking with both these boys, and they're like, what are you doing out here? Blah, 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 asking him all these questions. And he's like, we were just fishing. And he's like, did you see anything? Because I don't know if you guys know this, but you're not supposed to be out here. But the reason that we're out here tonight is because all the silent alarms on this tourist attraction, on this pier, were all set off. So they think the police officers think that these two boys were trying to break into it or did something to set off these alarms. But they didn't. And they're just sitting there so confused. His buddy is like lethargic and just a zombie. And he noticed that his friend actually peed in his pants. You could see it clear as day. And he was still visibly shooken and all this other stuff. And the police officer, he's like, well, I'm going to go do another run. You stay here with this officer, and then we're going to contact your parents and take you home, or get your parents to come out here and pick you up. And he said that the police officer was standing there and he just asking him a couple questions, like, you sure you guys didn't hit nothing? You didn't yank on a door? You know, all this other stuff. And Keith is just sitting there completely silent, not saying a word. And Jake is like, no. He's like, we come out here and we fish all the time. But he's like, I did see a strange man. And that was the only thing that he knew what to say. He's like, I didn't know what to say at the time. So I told him there was a strange man and he chased us. And the police officer got on the radio and they're like, oh, the boys said there was a strange man, maybe a homeless man out here. So maybe he's the one that set off the alarm. And the other police officer said, did you collect all your stuff? And he's like, no, it's over on the right side of the pier. He's like, we have 2 fishing poles, a tackle box, and a bucket. And they're not super far away from the pier, but a good distance. And he said that they were standing out next to the police car, and they could see the other officer walking around from a distance with the flashlight. Now, Jake, which is the main character of the story, is sitting there watching this other police officer like a hawk. He couldn't see him, but he could see the flashlight. And as Jake told me, he was like, he was waiting for this man to scream. He was waiting for this guy to get basically deleted. Because he knows what he saw, and whatever this thing was massive, it was fast, but they didn't hear anything. Police officers just going around doing all this, and all of a sudden the police officer comes walking back, and the only thing in his hand is a fishing pole, except it's been snapped in half, and he only has half the pole. And Jake is like, that the police officer's like, is this one of your poles? And he's like, yeah, but it wasn't broken. And he's like, we had 2 poles, a tackle box, and a white bucket, painting bucket, that we used to put our fish in. But the police officer's like, I didn't see anything out there. He's like, this is the only thing I seen, and it was laying in front of the bench. And he's like, as he told me himself, he was like, I know for a fact that they had 2 fishing poles, a tackle box, and a white bucket they used to put their fish in. These poles were not broken before. And he knew he was in deep, deep trouble, because this was one of his dad's favorite fishing poles that he had out here with him. So he was, very scared but very upset, and now he knew he was in trouble. He didn't know if he was going to be in trouble with the police. And his buddy Keith is still just sitting there like a zombie. Lethargic, not saying anything, not acknowledging anything, just nothing. Like as if he was completely absent. And Jake is trying to talk to him, but he's not really getting much of any conversation or anything out of him at all. And he's really, really confused. He's freaking out still, and he's thinking this cop, he was going to get, taken out when he was over there. But like I said, the police officer came back and he handed him this broken pole. He's like, that's all I seen. And the police officer went and told him what happened. And he was like, probably about 10-15 minutes ago, all the silent alarms in the pier got set off. Which is very bizarre, because usually those alarms only get set off as if somebody manages to get inside the building. Because the silent alarms usually trigger when somebody's on the inside. Now, I don't know how true that is. I'm just going by what the story says. But he said no alarm ever got set off the whole time they were there. And they didn't hear anything, nothing. The police officer's like, well, we're going to contact your parents, or I'm just going to take you home. So Keith and Jake both agreed that they would let the police officer take them home. Now, mind you, there are 2 cops in 2 separate cop cars. The guy that they were waiting over there with them is the cop car that the police officer escorted them in, and that's when they got into the back seat and they were going to be taken home. And the other police officer was back in his car, and he hadn't left yet. He was still sitting back there, and the other police officer starts to leave the pier with them in the back seat. And he said that he kept trying to get Keith's attention, wouldn't respond to nothing, and Jake decided to look back. Now, mind you, right as this is going on, the other police officer pulls off and leaves before the officer that had them in the back of the car, because he was asking them, hey, how do you get to your house, blah, blah, blah. And that's when Jake turned around and looked back towards the pier. And as he looks back, right underneath the light that sits directly in, it's like goes over top of this canopy like roof thing, and there's this large light that sits there that lights up the front part of the building. And he said that when he turned around and looked, all he could see was this huge thing standing underneath the light, and it's literally got its finger up. He said it looked like it was pointing at them both. And I guess at this moment, the police officer happened to look in his mirror, and he slammed on the brakes. And all of a sudden, he said that the police officer grabbed his radio, and he's like, hey, I just saw somebody standing in the front of the pier. We need to go back and investigate what's going on, but there's somebody definitely out there. Now, mind you, Keith didn't see it because he was in zombie mode. I don't know. And Jake seen it when he happened to turn around, standing right underneath the light, and he said it looked like he was pointing at them. And that's when the other police officer radioed, and the other officer that already left stopped and turned around and went back. And he said that this thing was there 1 second and gone the next. He said it was like literally you blinked your eyes and you would have missed it. Now, police officer went back, the other officer took them home, and that's the end of the first part of this story. Now, the next part of the story, it gets a whole lot worse, and it's all going to be in this one video. I'm just going to take a break in between. But what are your guys' thoughts so far on this? Because, you know, I couldn't even give an answer to when this gentleman was, you know, telling me his story. And then when I read the full story, when he wrote it out and sent it to me in an email, I'm just like, what in the world is this? Is it an alien? Is it some type of cryptid that we've never heard of? Is it like it's on the water? Is it some type of like mermaid, or, you know, something that's definitely supernatural? Something that has, you know, speed and strength. And something, you know, what got me the most is when he's running, he turned to look behind him because he can hear this thing coming up on him, and he said he watched it lunge for him, but then a cop's flashlight is in his, you know, in his face, and the cop is like, you know, not tackling him but grabbing him mid-run. Where did it go? You see what I mean? That literally, the thing was just coming after him, and then milliseconds later it's gone. That can't be normal. But anyways, I'm going to take a short break, and I will be right back for you guys. It'll only be a second. So, alright, I am back. I know it was only a brief second for you, but it was actually a day break in between because I had to go get my children and all that good stuff. You know, beauties of being a father and all that good stuff. So, in the beginning of that whole story, you know, he talks about some unknown type of creature or entity. Now, I don't really know what it is. but it really kind of represents to me personally maybe like the Egyptian god of Anubis. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is or if that's even real, but of everything he described it and things that I've looked up, it kind of resembles that. Like it's like a jackal, which is a dog that has, like gold armor on. And he said he could see it underneath these tattered, like, like monk robes or something like that. So, this is the second encounter that he had with this strange creature. And this one is very, very strange. So, I'm going to try to interpret this story as best as I can, as I'm going by notes and stuff. And, because I can't sit here and read the entire story for word, because I would be here a very, very, very long time. So, after the police officers and everything took him home, his dad was mad at him, but he did not get in trouble. But he tried to tell his dad that he saw something very bizarre, and of course, as a lot of parents, unfortunately, this day do not listen to their children when they say they've seen something, strange or scary or paranormal, something of that nature. And, well, parents should listen to those things. Just putting it out there. So he said, about 2 to 3 days later, he can't remember, he was trying to reach out to his buddy Keith and never heard a word from him at all. It was like he completely ghosted him, didn't want to talk to him. He went over to his house, his dad answered the door, and he said that Keith just wasn't feeling well, which he knew that was a lie, but that's just the way it went. Well, this thing kept playing over and over and over in this young man's mind. And he said it scared him a lot. Well, about 2 to 3 days later, this is kind of from his dad's point of view. The main character of the story, he is in his room asleep. Now, he said that their house that they lived in had like a wall here and a wall here. And right here against this wall was like the dining room area that had windows that went all the way around to where his dad could look into the backyard that was fenced in. And on this side corner over here was the gentleman's window to his room. And it was also in the fenced in area of this house in the backyard. Well, his dad was ex-military, so his dad didn't sleep all that great. And he said that his dad, now this is what his dad told him. His dad actually believed him after his dad seen this same thing. So he said that his dad was sitting in a chair in the dining room, just sitting there smoking a cigarette and just kind of I don't know, hanging out. And his dad said that he heard this loud noise from like the far end of the backyard. Now, he did say that there was a shed back there and there was a bunch of lawnmowers, because in his dad's spare time he had a small engine repair thing going on where he would fix people's lawnmowers, and he would buy lawnmowers that were broken and fix them up. So there was a bunch of push mowers and a couple riding lawnmowers that were in the backyard. And he said there was a couple on the opposite fence that were basically broken, so if they got stolen, his dad didn't really care. But, they lived in a somewhat decent neighborhood, so they really weren't worried about that. But where he heard this noise was in the backyard, but on the other side of the shed, so he couldn't see anything. And his dad heard this strange noise, and it was not really loud, but it sounded like somebody was hopping over the fence, but he wasn't for sure. Well, his dad just sat there looking, and he said that his dad seen this very large black silhouette in the dark come walking through the yard. And he said that it was moving very, very slow, but it was like, the way he said it is, it was looking straight, and just so happened straight was to this gentleman's bedroom window. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty scary. But it gets better. So his dad's just kind of in disbelief of like, oh God, somebody's going to try to break in or someone's trying to steal my lawnmowers. And his dad in the kitchen had a locked drawer that he said that he kept a .357 Magnum in. Well, his dad went to grab the weapon out of this drawer, and his dad just kind of was just staring at this thing as it was slowly walking through the yard. And his dad said whoever it was a very big man. And his dad went to the window and he started to slide it open so he could holler at this person, maybe to startle him, to get him out of there. And he started sliding open the window, and it was like this person didn't even care, which at the time his dad thought it was just someone trying to steal or break into the house. And he started sliding open this window, and his dad was like, "Hey, you, freeze! What are you doing back here? I'm armed." And his dad said to him that it didn't even acknowledge him at all. It just did. Whoever this was or what it was did not care at all. It was not frightened. It was not scared. So his dad says, "You need to get out of here. I am armed. I will shoot." And this thing just kept going towards his son's window. It was like tunnel vision on his window. Now, at the time, he didn't realize that's what this thing was doing, or whatever was what a person thing, I don't know. And he said that this thing just kept going, and his daddy did. He loaded the hammer, and he's like, "I'm going to shoot." And this thing still did not acknowledge anything. And his dad, he did pull the trigger. And he said he fired, and he knows he hit it, but he said when he hit it, it sounded like it hit metal. Like the bullet ricocheted off of this thing. And he fired another time, except the second bullet he never heard hit anything. And he said right after he fired towards this thing, now mind you, his dad was ex-military, so he knew how to use a weapon, he knew how to aim, but he said that this thing grabbed a hold of one of the push mowers in the backyard by the handle and flung it towards his dad at those windows. Busted out one of the windows. It hit the house really hard. He said that this thing flung this lawnmower like it weighed absolutely nothing. And, back a long time ago, push mowers were made, out of like steel and aluminum. They were actually well built. They're not made of a bunch of plastic and stuff like they are now. So they're actually pretty heavy. And for something to pick it up by the handle of it and just fling it like a rag doll, and the window sits up pretty high up, because the backyard's a little bit lower and the house is up higher, and it just flung it at him. And it kind of startled his dad to where he kind of jumped back in shock. And he said this thing, he watched it go to the other fence that was, so if you have his window right here, there was the other side of the fence. He said this thing went and just like leaped straight over it like it was nothing. Now, excuse me, I need a drink. At this point, the son, of course, is up, freaking out, like what's going on. His dad actually grabbed the house phone, called the police, and the police showed up. They were looking around. There was no damage to the fence. They seen the lawnmower. It did bust out a window. It hit some of the vinyl siding on the side of the house and busted it up pretty bad. And they looked around. They didn't see any footprints, no nothing. Of course, the main character of this story is a little boy. And, he's asking his dad, and his dad's like, "You just go in there. I got to talk to the police," all that stuff. And the police were looking around, and the police actually got my dad to come outside and asked him if this was, it's been like this. So my dad went around to the outside of the fence to where this thing hopped over it. and there was a push mower there. But this is what the craziest thing is, and he says that he's not making this up, his dad's not making this up. There was a push mower on the other side of this fence where this thing leaped over it. And he said that, alright, so anyone knows a push mower has 4 wheels, and the engine sits in the center of its little base, and it's got 4 wheels. He said whatever this was hopped over the fence and landed on this lawnmower. But when it did, it smashed the engine through the bottom, and all the wheels, I guess where the impact and weight, bent the wheels upwards and sent the engine through the lawnmower and just obliterated this thing from the weight of whatever this was that hopped over the fence. And, you know, of course, his dad got with him and said that I saw something, I don't know what it was, I shot at it, and the boy's like, I told you I saw something very, very scary out of the pier. And his dad actually believed him because he told his son that he knows for a fact that he shot this thing, and he knows that he shot it twice, but he said that one bullet sounded like it hit like metal and ricocheted, and the other one, he don't know if it hit or not. But it did scare this thing away, so I'm assuming maybe it hit it, but there was no blood, there was no footprints in the backyard, which is very bizarre because if something was able to crush the lawnmower from its sheer weight of hopping the fence, but yet left no trace besides that. And of course a lawnmower that, you know, shattered a window and busted the vinyl siding on the side of the house. So I don't know, like, this is so weird and bizarre. Like, I don't know how to explain what this could be. But the gentleman did tell me that years went by and he never seen this thing, heard this thing anymore. But he said every once in a while he would feel like he was being watched. And he said it always happened when he was near water. So I don't know if it's, you know, tied to water or what. I don't know. But all I know is this is probably one of the most bizarre and creepiest stories I've ever heard. And I listen to other YouTubers on YouTube, you know, people on TikTok, and, you know, I look all this stuff up. I look for new stories and things like that. I have never heard a story like this before, ever. So I hope that you guys did enjoy this. I'm trying to get more content out there. So if you want to help a fellow North Carolinian and a small content creator that's trying to, you know, get his foot in the door on YouTube and trying to turn this into a full-time career, and if you are interested in coming on to the show, you're welcome to message me in the comment section down below, or my TikTok is in the description. If you want to come on and tell me your own personal stories, or if you want to be able to, you know, just send me an email or message me on TikTok, you can do that. If you don't want to come on and tell the story, you could tell me your story and I can reread it on YouTube. So I do greatly appreciate all the support, and I hope my videos are good. But this one right here, to me, this was an amazing story, and I don't even know what it could be. I mean, I've never heard anything like this before, so I have no way of, you know, comparing it. And to be honest, I don't see why this person would make up this story. And he says that his dad can validate, you know, what he's seen and what happened in the backyard. But as this gentleman says, he's like, I don't care who believes me. He's like, I know what I saw, and it, you know, it still haunts him to this day. So you guys be the judge of it. And I know that I do a lot of cryptid and strange monsters and spooky stuff on this channel, but I also have a video I'm coming out with this coming week to where I just want to talk about the strange, bizarre, and, you know, just strange things that are happening all over the world. You know, time doesn't feel quite right. You know, a lot of things just feel off. And I'd like to discuss those things too, just because, well, I kind of want to focus on everything that's creepy, the unknown, unsettling, all that good stuff. So I greatly appreciate it. Feel free to like and subscribe, or don't, but if you do, I greatly appreciate. I am Andrew, and this is Discovering the Truth. Hope you have a wonderful and amazing day, and I can't wait to see all of you guys in the next video. Thank you again for all the support. Have a good one.